Hi, this is Scott Moffitt, and welcome to this month's webinar on elder law basics. I'm joining today with Jennifer Anstaett, and we are going to talk about a lot of different topics with regard to elder law. But we're going to jump right in here and talk about the differences between Medicare and Medicaid.
Can you speak just about the misconceptions that exist around Medicare and Medicaid?
Sure. So Medicare is a federal program. When you turn 65, most people are going to be eligible for Medicare. And there is Part A, Part B. So when you start receiving Social Security, you'll see a deduction in your Social Security check to pay your Medicare premiums. There's also Part D, which is the prescription drug premiums. So that is your typical health insurance like you're used to. It's just provided by Medicare instead of you paying or your employer paying for private health insurance. Now you're on this Medicare program. Medicaid is different. Medicaid is a joint federal state program. So the federal government has broad rules that all states have to follow, but then they implement their own rules. And Medicaid is there as a safety net. So this is a welfare program for people with low income and low resources. And one of the things that people don't understand about Medicaid is that there's all sorts of Medicaid programs. So there's, 15 different Medicaid programs in Ohio. And you may or may not be eligible for one of those programs. So the Medicaid program that I'm dealing with the most is Medicaid to pay for long-term care, so care in a nursing home. So people think that Medicare is going to pay for that, and they're really not. So Medicare will pay for up to 100 days in a facility. They pay in full for the first 20 days, and there's a copay for the next 80 days. Medicaid, on the other hand, if you qualify, will pay for your full room and board in a nursing home, and that's an unlimited time frame.
Okay. And if I could just interject real quickly here. So in Ohio, if I heard you correctly, each state has specific rules for Medicaid
Yes.
and in different programs. So if a person is going to qualify for long-term care through Medicaid in Ohio, do they essentially have to spend down all of their assets in order to qualify for that?
No. So unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, every situation is going to be a little bit different. If you're single, so if you're not married, it is, I think, generally true that you're going to have to spend down almost all of your assets. So if you're single, you can only have $2,000 or less in resources in order to be eligible for Medicaid. So that's, like I said, this is a welfare program. So yes, you have to reduce your assets quite a bit. Now there's all sorts of things we can do with those assets. Maybe you can give some of those assets to a disabled child. Maybe you can put some of those assets into an annuity. There's all sorts of planning techniques, but basically, if you're single, you are going to have to spend down most of your money. However, if you're married, it could be that you have a lot of money and you're still going to qualify for Medicaid. And that's because a lot of assets are actually exempt. So Medicaid doesn't count those towards your eligibility. So if you're married, a house is exempt. So the house that the community spouse, so the person not in the nursing home, the house they live in is exempt. It does not count towards your Medicaid eligibility. One car, regardless of value, is exempt. Your personal property, the stuff you own, is not countable. Recently, Medicaid has said IRAs are not countable as long as you're taking some minimum required distributions. And you can start taking those distributions well before age 72. So it's not just for people 72 and older, it's people of any age. A 401k is most likely going to be exempt. So there's lots of assets that don't count. An annuity in payout status. So if you have an annuity and you've annuitized it so that you're getting a monthly payout, is not an available resource. It doesn't count towards your Medicaid eligibility. So what you have to do is you have to look at each individual's balance sheet and figure out, is this a countable resource or is this something that we can exclude altogether? So most people, the house, we take that off the top, that doesn't count. The IRAs, those leave. The annuities, those leave. And it's whatever we have left that has to be spent down. Not all of it has to be spent down, though. The community spouse is allowed to keep 1/2 of her assets up to around $150,000. So the most they're going to be able to keep of these non-exempt resources is about $150,000. So the community spouse, we know, is going to be left with half, up to $150,000 of resources, plus all of the exempt things. So that's where the interesting part comes in. How do we spend these assets down, or how do we convert them into exempt assets without just using all of our money to pay for our care?
And Jennifer, when you talk about, these assets being identified as a resource, right, versus an asset, because it's in an income stage, if you will, do we have to be concerned on the income side of that as well? Meaning from the qualification perspective? So is there kind of a tightrope that we have to walk with that?
Yeah, so Medicaid looks at everything as either an income stream in one hand or a resource in the other. So your resources you have to spend down. Okay. The income is treated differently. So income includes Social Security income, pension income, and your minimum required distributions from your IRAs. That's pretty much it.
Okay. So even if we're taking more from the IRA, that will not count against us.
That counts as income. So if I'm in the nursing home, I have to use all of my income to pay for my care.
Okay.
So my Social Security, my pensions, and my minimum required distributions, I'll have to use to pay for my care.
Okay.
But my community spouse, my husband who's at home, he doesn't have to use any of his income to pay for my care. So let's give an example, because I think that's easier. So let's say my husband has Social Security and he has a pension. He keeps all of that. But let's say we have $100,000 that we're going to have to spend in the resource bucket. So not income, but resource. How do we take that 100,000 and dump it over here as an income stream? What we can do is we take that $100,000. We don't use that to pay for care. Instead, we purchase an annuity for my husband who's in the community. And that all of a sudden, it's no longer a resource. Now that's income. He gets to keep all of his income. So he gets to keep those annuity payments every month, and he can either use those to live off of, or he can save that money in the bank. He doesn't have to spend that on me in the nursing home. So yeah, so we can get really creative with, how we spend our money.
Absolutely. And clearly, and this kind of leads, I think, into the next question in terms of there's a lot of planning involved here with something like this. So, should all seniors be concerned about this, and about long-term care? Is it something that's kind of a universal concern, or are there some people that need to be more worried about a plan than others?
So I think as far as how many people have to worry about long-term care, you know, you can look this up on the internet. I think there's lots of different statistics out there on how many people are going to need long-term care. I think what I looked up a few days ago when we were talking about this, the number 7 out of 10 people will require some sort of long-term care. So 7 out of 10 is a lot. Now, what that doesn't mean that 7 out of 10 people are going to live in a nursing home for years on end.
Right.
That can be anything from you need in-home care to assisted living to rehab stays after an accident or illness to what we think of as living in a nursing home. But this is something that it is a good idea to plan for. So whether you decide individually you want to purchase a long-term care policy. So for example, my parents have long-term care insurance. That made financial sense in their situation. I have clients that I counsel not to get long-term care insurance. I have clients that I say, yes, call Scott immediately and talk to him about whether you need long-term care insurance. Because it can be financially devastating. There are some people who have enough resources that they can pay for long-term care and it's not going to really impact their spouse or their kids' inheritance. Right. There's some people that don't have many assets at all, and they're going to go right on Medicaid. So, they don't really need long-term care insurance. It's the people in the middle. I think that's a lot of our clients, the people in the middle where this is really going to hurt, to either have to pay for a nursing home for a long period of time or to have to try to spend down to get on Medicaid. It's going to be a more painful process to have to go through. So really, just like with any of this, Scott, it's so specific on your situation.
I agree. And it's interesting. I just had this conversation with a couple people yesterday with regard to, long-term care insurance. And I always preface it by saying there's a lot of things that go into making the decision of whether or not long-term care insurance is the right thing for you. And recognizing long-term care insurance is not necessarily easy to get.
Right.
And it's not cheap. It is expensive. But at the end of the day, the whole subject matter of elder care and nursing home and home health care, it's all expensive. One way or another, there is a significant cost that we have a very high likelihood that we're going to incur. And so it's really about how do we manage that, right? And I agree with you. For some people, I think long-term care insurance makes a lot of sense. For other people, it may not be a necessary asset that they should be spending their resources on at this point in time.
Right.
I'd love to have your thoughts and opinion on, when is the right time for people to be talking with somebody such as yourself about this type of planning? Because unfortunately, sometimes it's a little bit of it's a heartache for me when I have conversations with people about this, and I know in my head it's too late, right? A lot of the planning that we could have done should have happened 10 years ago. So in your mind, when do you like to see people coming and having that conversation with you?
So, for whatever reason, I think when people retire, we see them coming in to do normal estate planning. So they come in to talk to us about their wills, if they need a trust, powers of attorney. And I think that's a great time too, to just start thinking about, okay, how much money do I have? What's going to happen if I need long-term care? I mean, it's too late at that point, maybe, to build up their savings. So now we know what we're working with. So a lot of times when I have people come in to do estate planning at that point in their life, we're also talking about, okay, here are the rules and here's what it looks like if you need long-term care. So I think in those meetings, maybe we don't do anything, we're not acting on a plan, but at least my clients then understand, if I need a nursing home 10 years from now, here's what that looks like. And then I think just anytime there's a change in your life, you have a diagnosis or you have a death in the family, or anytime anything comes up that's sort of a life change, that's a good time to go over your estate planning documents and also think, okay, is it time now to do this planning? So some planning we do early, and that would be planning where we're giving money away. So we're actually going to give some money away, anticipating that we're going to need Medicaid 5 years from now. So Medicaid looks back at your financial records for 5 years. And if you've given a gift in that 5-year period, they're not happy about it. They're going to penalize you for it.
Right.
So if you come to me and you're already in a nursing home, you've had a medical crisis, it's too late in many instances to do a lot of that planning. There's still planning we can do, but it gets to be a little bit more limited. So it is something where you want to sort of plan ahead. A lot of the planning I do, unfortunately, is sort of crisis planning. Someone is in the nursing home, and sometimes you can't avoid that. If your loved one has an accident, you couldn't have foreseen that.
Life happens.
Right. And there's still a lot we can do. I mean, you can still purchase an annuity. We can still start taking minimum required distributions from your IRA. So there's a lot we can do, but the further in advance you plan, the better. I'm not doing estate planning documents for people I'm not doing Medicaid planning for people in their 40s. 40s and 50s, I'm not doing Medicaid planning for. It's still too early. But I do think around the retirement age is when we want to start talking to people and just make sure that it's in their mind.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. And you brought up the gifting concept, and I want to just touch on that a little bit more, if you don't mind. A lot of times people will ask me that question about gifting money to the kids, right? Gifting money to their son or daughter or to the grandkids or whatever. And in my mind, gifting strategies cannot be taken lightly, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there are pros and cons to that. And so when somebody's thinking about that, I would imagine that you walk them through the pluses and the minuses of doing that, because really a gift is a gift, which means you're giving up control and right to that asset, correct?
So, right. So Scott, if you came into my office today and you said, I want to give all my money away.
Well, I have kids, so I'm already doing that.
Right. Well, that's true. You say, I want to give my kids all my money today. So then I'm going to say to you, let's walk through what that looks like. So if I have had clients who have literally given all their money away to their kids, I think what I say to them is, this is your money that you have to live on for the rest of your life. So before you give all of it away, or before you give part of it away, can you afford to maintain your lifestyle? So what lifestyle do you want to have in your retirement? And are you willing to sacrifice that lifestyle so that your kids have an inheritance? Because, like you said, Scott, for Medicaid purposes, you have to give the money away. Now you can put the money in a trust for your kids, but it's not your money anymore and you can't get it back. So if your kids decide to give it back, if you need it and they give it back to you, that's fine, but they don't have to give it back. So I think this isn't a decision that you want to make. Just come into my office, I tell you about gifting, and all of a sudden you're giving your money away. I think it's definitely something you want to talk through. I've also had clients where I've said, here's the rules. You don't need to give your money away because we can do other planning. You can annuitize money. Now that IRAs can be exempt, that's a total game changer. So I am not the type of attorney that tells all my clients to give their money away. I don't. I think Scott, if you come to my office, I represent you. I don't represent your kids.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Right. Well,
So,
and not to go down too much of a tangent on this, but I also talk with people about, because I've seen this happen with some people where, well, Scott, I completely trust my son and daughter. They would, if I need the money, they're going to give it back to me. And that's not really the point. If you're giving them an asset, it now opens up the money you've given to them to exposure to risks that they may incur, divorce, lawsuits, things of that nature, right? And so there's a lot of things that go into that whole concept, and which I guess is why it really requires a plan and forethought to before you go and do that.
that's right. I mean, you might have a unexpected death, and you've given your son all, most of your money, and he passes away, and then what's going to happen? So, or your son and your daughter-in-law pass away, and then their kids have the money. Well, they're minors, maybe they can't give you the money back. So there's all sorts of things you have to think about. That's right.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this. So I'm quite certain there's a lot of people on here that feel like I need to sit down and talk about this, because I would say a lot of my clients fall into that middle ground, right? They don't have so much income, so much assets that they can self-insure, if you will, and yet more than where they're going to qualify for Medicaid right away. So they're that middle ground. It probably makes sense to sit down with Jennifer. What does that meeting or meetings look like? What's that process? Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, what normally happens, at least at our law office, there's quite a few of us who practice in this area. And I think what we do is we want to sit down with you. We want to look at your estate planning documents, if you have them. If you don't have estate planning documents, we're going to suggest that you sign those. So we are going to want to draft a will for you, perhaps a trust, a financial power of attorney, and a healthcare power of attorney. So you're gonna hear us say to you, you need those documents. Then we're gonna want to look at all of your assets. So I don't want to see a bank statement necessarily, but a financial statement, a list. And we're going to go through that list, and we're going to help you make sure that when you pass away, those assets go where you want them to go. So we're going to help you with the will. We're also going to help you with beneficiary designations, or tell you to, maybe you want to trust. We want to transfer ownership of those assets to trust. That's going to be part of what we talk about. And then we're going to talk about, all right, let's say you go into a nursing home. What's the plan? So usually by the end of an initial meeting, we can recommend what estate planning documents you need. And you're going to have a pretty good idea of what will happen if you need a nursing home. So we may not be down to the nitty gritty of exactly practically the steps you're going to take if you go into a nursing home, but you're going to know roughly, here's what my income is, here's what my resources are, and here's a plan for becoming eligible for Medicaid. So that's at the end of the initial meeting. That can take anywhere from an hour to a couple hours. We try to limit the time of those meetings because this is heavy stuff. It's not fun.
Right.
And my brain starts to go, and definitely my clients are like, okay, that's a lot. So that's kind of what initially it looks like. And then we sort of say, okay, what are we going to do going forward? Do you want us to work on estate planning documents? Do you want to go back to your estate planning attorney? So we have I get a lot of referrals from other attorneys in town, estate planning attorneys. And I say, okay, I'm going to call your attorney, and you're going to call your attorney, and here's what changes we need to make to your documents. Do you want a follow-up letter with the Medicaid plan? So do you want me to put this in writing so that you can think about it? Because again, these are decisions that you don't want to make, just snap decisions. You want to think about these things. Right. If you came into my office, Scott, that might be all we do. If I have a client whose spouse is in the nursing home, we're going to get the ball rolling. We're going to call you. We're going to annuitize an annuity. We're going to start taking minimum distributions. We're going to, buy a new car. So a car is exempt, and we're going to call you, Scott, and say we need $30,000 for a new car. We're going to start to actually sort of take all the steps to get a Medicaid application going. So it really, again, just like all of this, it's just so dependent on where you are, what your situation is. But after that initial meeting, you're going to have a pretty good idea of what you need to do.
Yeah, and what I like about it, Jennifer, and I've seen, the after meeting, I've had the after meeting conversations with a few of my clients that have met with you, and that's exactly right. In some cases there was, a peace of mind that, hey, doesn't look like we really need to do anything at this point in time. And then there's hey, here are some strategies that we may want to employ at some point in time, right? So at least they have an idea. And to much of the example you just gave, to somebody who is near end of life, going to spend a lot of money over the next 12 months, what are some strategies we need to start implementing right away, right? So you walk away with an idea of, what are my options and what's the sense of urgency with it? And that's, at the end of the day, I think, a peace of mind to at least know, right?
Right.
Well, this has been hugely helpful, and I appreciate you taking your time. If you've got just a few more minutes, I'd like to open it up to just some questions from people on board.
Sure.
Okay. Brittany, do we have, can you do that? If you've got a question out there, just go ahead and type it into the chat, and Brittany will then let us know what that question is.
Yep, the chat is open.
I know a number of people on here. I see their names. I know they're not shy, and I know they have questions. So
I was gonna say, I don't know if I can.
Single versus married is home exempt.
So there's a lot of rules around homes, a lot of Medicaid rules. If you're married and your spouse lives in the home, it's exempt. If you're single, it's a little more complicated. So there are, in general, the rule is no, it's not exempt. But there's a lot of ways to make it exempt. So for example, if you have a disabled child who lives with you, that home is going to be exempt if the disabled child lives there. If you have a sibling with an equity interest in your home, which actually happens more often than you think, that home would be exempt. If you tell Medicaid that you intend to return home, then Medicaid will allow you to keep the home. So there's a lot of ways to keep the home exempt. The problem is when you're single, your income has to go to pay the cost of your care, and you could only have $2,000 in resources. So remember our buckets. $2,000 is all you can have in resources, and all of this income has to go to pay for your care. So you don't have any money left over to take care of a house. You just don't. So most of our single individuals with a home have to sell unless they have a family member who's willing to pay those bills. So that's an issue. The house is an issue. The other issue is when you pass away in Ohio, anything left in your name at your death is subject to what's called Medicaid estate recovery. So they recoup the cost of anything they paid on your behalf. So they're going to put a lien on your house if you're single and you die with the home. So that's unfortunately, there's ways to salvage some money. There's ways to save the home. They don't work for everybody.
Okay, another Angie asked, I thought the earlier you purchase long-term care, the less expensive the available options are. Does long-term care only cover a limited number of disease processes?
So, Angie, you're right. The younger you are, the less expensive long-term care is likely going to be. You know, it's age and medical history, right? What issues are you dealing with? And so, generally speaking, the earlier you buy it, the less expensive it's going to be, and many times more options that you have available to you. Unfortunately, a lot of people see it as very cost prohibitive, so they choose to wait. Sometimes they wait so long that now all of a sudden some issues have crept up in their medical situation, which makes it either challenging to get or just extremely expensive. Jennifer, is that your same viewpoint with that?
Yes, that's my experience as well. Right.
And in terms of covering what it covers, generally speaking, it's more about activities of daily living. So if you are unable to perform what they call ADLs, usually it's 2 out of 5 or 2 out of 6 activities of daily living, then you will qualify for the long-term care. There are various issues with whether or not the insurance company, whether their medical team will qualify you, or whether your own physician will qualify you. But it's not really about what the disease is. It's more about what your abilities are or are not in terms of qualifying for it. I'm going to, I see Joe's question here about how often should you re-examine your estate planning? And he says, you know, every 5 years. What's your thoughts on that, Jennifer?
So I would say we tell people every 5 years for definitely, or anytime you have a life change. So you retire, you get a divorce, someone passes away, you have a marriage in the family, a baby is born. Sometimes that is just as quick as a phone call. Hey, I've had this happen. Do I need to make any changes? And the answer may be no, you're fine. But I would say every 5 years, or whenever anything, like I said, you have a major life change.
Perfect. And I agree with that. I think that makes a lot of sense. Brittany, any other questions coming in? If not, I think we'll wrap it up here. I think we're right at about 35 minutes.
Yeah, no, there's no other ones. I'm gonna go ahead and put up the slide with your guys' contact information.
Perfect. And Jennifer, is a phone call or an email to you if somebody would like to begin that process of scheduling a meeting?
Absolutely. Just give me a call, shoot me an email, and we'll connect.
That's great. So we'll give it just a minute here so that you can jot down Jennifer's information. If you're not at a position where you can jot that down, you can obviously reach out to us here at the office, and we'll get you all of Jennifer's information. And Jennifer, once again, thank you for all the work that you've done for my clients. It means a lot to me that they're in good care. And thank you for taking your time today. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we thank all of you for joining in on our monthly webinar. We hope that this has been helpful to you. Same time every month, we're hosting anywhere from a 20 to 30-minute webinar. Next week, I'm going to be including Max Ripberger. Max has been with Summit for about 5 years. He really handles the money management, moving all of our money when we're making investment changes. He is also the one that is in charge of our youth financial program. So there's a lot of information coming out about that and on our new website. So you'll see more about that. But next month on the 18th, we're going to talk about the Roth IRA. And there's a lot of stuff to cover about the Roth IRA. And even if you are nearing retirement or in retirement, there are topics to talk about with the Roth, including the backdoor Roth concept. There's a lot of talk about that, but that is can be effective, but there are some things about that you better make sure you're aware of before you go and pull the trigger of doing something like that. Should we be converting, even in retirement, should we be converting money from IRAs to Roth IRAs? 401k, Roth versus traditional 401k. So these are a lot of topics that Max and I are going to touch on next month. Brittany, thanks to you again, as always. And if you need anything, please feel to reach out to us. But thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.